When France marked the start of the new year, a familiar scene hit several cities across the country. Thousands of cars were torched, public properties were destroyed, and the police were attacked. But the circumstances for what officials have described as riots were different from last year. Figures show the scale of violence was bigger on the eve of the new year than what occurred last year. Analysts believe this shows the rising public dissatisfaction with the state of the affairs in France. Protests for economic demands, which is portrayed in the country's media and also by officials as riots.
It definitely is a result of dissatisfaction with the current state of affairs in France. Unemployment is quite high. It's about at least 12%, could possibly be higher. As I said, it's very high amongst the young populations of in these areas where these kind of attacks take place. There's serious disaffection amongst these people, many of whom, well, increasingly over the past few years, more and more of them are more recent immigrants to France, and they feel no identification, no solidarity, no sense of Frenchness. They don't feel like they're French citizens. So if you're living in a country and you don't feel any identification with that culture or with the police force or with the government or with the culture in general, then you're much more likely to act out in these ways.
Meanwhile, the French president, in his New Year message, promised to push on with his plans for reform. Macron also told the nation in his televised speech that he will press ahead with the political changes he had promised to create after elections. And he has said his government would specifically work with other European partners like Germany over ways to progress.
The main thing that the French government could do would be to give these young people who are carrying out most of these attacks, give them something to do, give them a sense of fulfillment or a sense of purpose in their lives, which obviously primarily would come through, well, first and foremost through giving them jobs, because like I said, so many of them are unemployed and don't have anything better to do. That would be definitely one way to first step in the right direction. And as I noted, Macron is finally kind of moving in that direction by making it more difficult for these people to live off the French state, so that they basically don't have to get a job because they get enough money from the state to live quite comfortably without actually having to get a job. And that just, that situation is deplorable.
It is generally believed that the angry riots which hit France on the New Year Eve were largely associated with the country's immigrant problem. France holds a large population of immigrants, most of whom come from countries in the Middle East and North Africa. And they have their own reasons to be dissatisfied with a country that hosts them. The wars in which France has participated in cooperation with other Western states, and the treatment of immigrants by the French government. These are only some basic reasons why the immigrants turn to violent ways to make their voices heard.
This problem in France is quite entrenched and has been there for a long, long time. And of course, the recent immigration influx over the past few years, or as a result of wars of conquest in the Middle East waged by Western countries, including France, have certainly not helped the problem. So it's hard to see this as something, anything other than just misrule in France and effectlessness among the French governing class, really. And I can only see this getting worse, to be honest, until saner heads prevail or come into power in the French government. And France has it pretty bad. France has the highest population of immigrants, effectively, in Europe, either first or second generation. So this is always going to be the worst in France. But as I said, stuff that's happened over the past few years and the general attitude of, in particular, Arabs and Muslims from France towards the French government has got a lot worse in recent years, and it's partly as a result of the French attitude towards foreign policy and its siding with the US and Western imperial adventures in Arab and Muslim countries.
The current riots in France were undoubtedly an expression of public anger against dissatisfactory economic conditions in the country, but the way it is treated by officials is noteworthy. There were few acknowledgements that these were a result of poor welfare conditions in the country. Instead, the way they were portrayed as riots appears to have been meant to distract the world public opinion from how a large population in France is suffering, and that, of course, as a result of the government's policies at home and abroad.